So, morning everyone. It's been great having that little chit chat actually. I'm sorry I can't move to a central position, but I've been asked to stand behind this lectern. What we've been trying to do is improve the quality of the recording, the voice recording unfortunately for me this morning with my croaky throat, and the recording overall for those many more colleagues, as I said to you a little earlier, who don't choose to be part of the live TV audience, but actually prefer to watch the briefing online. So this is why we've been a little delayed, but thank you, Toby, for making it and setting up what hopefully will be a better recording. I won't be able to give you feedback on whether it is because I never choose to watch myself speaking at this lectern. But it's been great having that little chit-chat this morning, actually. It's been really valuable for me receiving your feedback about the value of these briefings, because obviously Learn Sheffield is so there's an ongoing review at Learn Sheffield as to the usefulness of everything we do and the impact of everything, the actions that we're taking. Stephen and I will be meeting I think it's a week on Monday, sort of looking at all the feedback that we're getting and doing some planning moving forward. So I really, really appreciate the feedback that you've given me this morning. I know that it's honest, and I would encourage you to encourage your colleagues really to give us some honest feedback when we send our sort of general evaluation forms out about the usefulness and of the different sessions that we put on. So thank you. Okay, this morning, Alasdaire, you seem to have been here all night really waiting to speak to us this morning. I'll just run through the order of play for this morning. Alasdaire's going to be with us for about another half an hour. Yeah, and assures me that you'll be happy to take questions as we go along. So please feel free to ask all of those questions that you want to ask, and maybe some of your colleagues would like to ask as well. You could ask them in their absence. Then Sean I don't know whether Sean's arrived yet, Thomas, no? But Sean Finch from Ambition School Leadership, which was formerly Teaching Leaders, is going to be talking to us for about 15 minutes. I'm going to give you some quick updates on the primary achievement strategy. I did ask Chris, who's leading on an aspect of that, if he'd like to join me, but happy not to this morning, happy to be in the audience rather than speaking, and a few dates from myself in terms of the Learn Sheffield update. And then Jane Campbell from the Wildlife Trust is going to be coming and speaking to you for 15 minutes. We are hoping to finish by 10 o'clock at the very latest. One of the decisions that we've already taken on the basis of your feedback is that we need to be finished by 10 o'clock. So that we can all get on with our daily business. So we will be finishing by 10 at the very latest. Alasdaire, do you need an introduction from me? Or would you? do you know everyone in the room? You know a lot of people in Sheffield. Do you want to come and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of a lowdown on your background and what you're doing this morning?
I'm hoping that this live TV audience means that you guys have got the laugh now for when I tell jokes and the clap now for when I say something really controversial.
You know, those radio programmes where it always sounds like there's a lot of people in the background.
My name's Alasdaire. I've been working in the council now for about 2 years, working alongside Tim and Anthony Hughes, formerly of this parish, on the sort of SEN reforms, delivering the SEN reforms and what is now the inclusion strategy. I am on secondment to the council from the Department for Education. For those who don't know my background, I spent the previous 5 years before I came here working on the SEN reforms, putting the legislation together, taking that through Parliament, and then Anthony asked me to come and put my money where my mouth is and come and work out in the council and actually help implement the reforms that I'd helped design in the first place. So this has definitely been the toughest end of that journey, I have to say, for a whole bunch of reasons, but very rewarding and very profitable at the same time. And the experience that I'll be taking back to the department at the end of March when my secondment finishes should be invaluable to them as well. So that's part of the reason they send me out. So that's a little bit of my background. We've moved from sort of just focusing on the SEN reforms to what is now this much bigger inclusion strategy, and some of that's out there and running, and so this is about just giving you an update on some of those things, providing some context around some of the things that are changing and happening. We've done a lot of work over the last few weeks around what's the need in the city, what's the trends looking like, what are we beginning to see emerging as we get underneath some of our data in a way that maybe we haven't been able to do quite as well before. So some of that's going to come through this, and then where we're going in terms of next steps. That's sort of the gist of what I'm going to cover. Do interrupt and ask questions. I did this with the Governors Partnership the other day, and we took 15 minutes to get off the first slide, so just bear in mind you do want to be away by 10 and you've got a whole other agenda to finish, but I am happy to take questions as we go. So, in terms of the overall strategy and the vision and sort of the things we've been doing already, that vision statement should be starting to become familiar. It's going out on most of these presentations and documents, so if you see me and Tim or others going out now, that we've got quite an ambitious vision statement in and of itself. It doesn't say anything that you wouldn't expect a vision statement to say, but actually to achieve it in Sheffield is going to be quite a task, because we're not that close to that vision at the moment. And particularly around the parental confidence aspect, which we really need to work on. A few things to say around where we're at the moment. So there has been a decision in the council not to reduce any of the inclusion funding. So all the inclusion services that we fund at the moment, their funding is staying the same. Now, one could argue that in real terms that still amounts to a cut because the demand is greater, but nonetheless, given where we're at, and the pressures that are on the council, that is a big decision for the council to make, that we're going to retain our level of investment in inclusion services and inclusion funding. So that's across MASS, that's things like the autism service, education psychology service, HIVI, those things are retaining their levels of funding that they've got at the moment. Underpinning a lot of the strategy is this whole idea of much more local control and influence over resources. So the whole idea of the locality working model, trying to emphasise that early identification and working together, being able to make decisions on the ground closer to the families that we're working with, rather than coming back through to the centre for some detached decision where we're not as close to it, we don't understand the background as much, and giving yourselves far more control over those resources through the locality funding and the locality way of working. Early identification is key. Some of you may have seen the Early Intervention Foundation report that came out last week, I think it was now, where they've done some research, and they have said that their estimate is that in England and Wales we spend £17 billion on late interventions that could have been prevented by intervening earlier. When you start to think of things like that, you think actually there's a bit of a prize to be won here in terms of if we can do that early identification and intervene earlier, there's a whole lot more money that can come back into that bit of the system that is currently being spent on those late interventions. And they've looked at things like substance misuse and young offenders and all those things where actually it's too late and we're spending a small fortune on people that potentially could have been prevented by far better earlier identification and intervention up the line. So a lot to play for. We need to reduce, as part of that, our reliance on specialist placements. So we are, in one respect, hemorrhaging school funding into the specialist sector at the moment. And that's a range of different things. That's poor practice in mainstream, a lack of emphasis on inclusion. That's about parental confidence and the choices that parents make, because we have a system that is predicated on a parent's choice. It's some of the marketing that those independent specialist providers do that is very difficult to compete against. So we have around about 50 children and young people in independent specialist provision, which costs usually upwards of £60,000 a year. Half of those are there because we lost tribunals, because we were not able to say that we could provide the equivalent, or at least what they needed, within the provision that we've got in the city. So that's part of the challenge that we've got, and that budget is already 800,000 overspent this year. And until we start to change the way we do things, we're not going to stop that trend towards those providers. And what that is arising from is and you may have heard others say this before, almost a trickle effect, that actually is we don't do inclusion as well in mainstream. Parents make choices for special schools. Special schools get full up of children and young people that really, the right support, would do better in mainstream. But then that takes away our space for those with more complex needs. So the more complex needs kids end up going out of city into those highly expensive places. And that's the bit that we've got to change fundamentally, and that's why locality working is being structured as it is, to help tackle some of that. And alongside that, we need to redesign and recommission with our health partners and our social care partners a lot of the way we do services at the moment, and health are already beginning to work with us on that, and I'll touch on some of those things as we go through. Oops, jumping ahead. Some of what we've been looking at is the demand, and what does demand look like across our city in terms of the needs of the children and young people that are coming through. Interestingly, and probably not surprisingly to some of you, that's what the figures currently look like. So autism is around about 50% of all of those restatements in education, health and care plans. We've not looked at the wider SEN population, but it won't be that different. Social, emotional, mental health needs is 18%, and speech, language and communications is 16%. And they're all rising, so not necessarily in terms of percentages, but in terms of hard figures, the actual numbers behind that, we're seeing a trend, an increasing trend, and our projections are, particularly around ASD and SEMH, that it's quite a steep increase over the next few years. That's not inconsistent with the rest of the country, so it's not unique to Sheffield, but it does present Sheffield with some particular challenges, one of which is that actually when you do a breakdown of the places that we've got in specialist settings, our focus is more on the SEMH and less on the ASD. So actually we don't have enough space in the system for those with ASD. And when you start to take that into the behaviour end of the spectrum, and that's the bit that I know those of you working in mainstream, actually that's the biggest challenge. Actually you can deal with ASD if it doesn't come with a behaviour issue with it. When it does, it starts to become a bigger challenge. And what we're doing at the moment with behaviours, they're ending up in the PRU, in the pupil referral unit. And you'll see from that figure on there, which is just one of many shocking figures around the PRU at the moment, that only 4% of those placements were shorter than 1 month in 15-16 compared to nearly 40% in 13-14. So we've seen a significant shift in how the pupil referral unit is used. It's no longer seeming to be, we get somebody in there, we do some remedial work with them, we deal with the behaviour and then we reintegrate them. Actually increasingly, children and young people are just staying there. And they're staying there without access to a decent curriculum, because actually the mainstream GCSE curriculum is not as available in that setting. But many of those children and young people are reasonably high functioning. And if we can bring their behaviour under control, they can access GCSEs and do quite well, and that sets them up for the future. At the moment, that's not happening. So we really need to think, how do we tackle all of those challenges, the mismatch between need and placement, and the fact that that means we are consigning people to failure by putting them into things like the pupil referral unit and other alternative provision, which just then throws a bigger burden on the top end of the system, and that's £17 billion of late interventions that the Early Intervention Foundation are talking about. So it's a big challenge, and one of the things trying to help everybody understand is, at the end of the day with schools, it's wherever we put them, it's the same pot of money. So at the end of the day, the EFA are giving us a share of the school budget that the country has. That share is not increasing, so the more we shift to specialists, the more actually that money starts to drift in that direction as well, which puts greater pressure on mainstream settings. There was a hand up.
It was just the funding thing. The huge difficulty is there's just that pot of money. At the moment, the vast majority goes on late interventions.
Yeah.
But to put something in earlier that's going to make a difference, that funding's got to shift.
Absolutely.
But you can't shift it because it's got to go there.
Absolutely.
So for a while, the system's got to suck it up and deal with it. I'm not entirely confident that if it does, the money that's there will be shifted to there. That's the trouble.
And that's dead right, and I've got some risks at the end of here, and one of our fundamental risks is, how do you shift from what is a late intervention model to an early intervention model when you don't have the money to fund both at the same time? Because really that's what you do, because you need to have time to make sure your early intervention model works before you pull the plug, if you like, on your late interventions. And Councillor Drayton, who obviously all this has to go through as the lead member for Children and Families, she gets that and she understands it. So those conversations are quite robust at senior levels within the council about how do we get that tension right when we don't have the resources to do it in the way we'd like to. And that's why some of this is about a phased transition, that actually we've got to try and stop the movement into those settings without stopping those settings being there and being available to us in the short term. Some of the way we're shifting your relationship with the pupil referral unit and alternative provision, and the way we've changed educational psychology support is part of doing that shift within the constraints that we have. And until we see those funding changes that were proposed in the funding consultation, which actually means Sheffield would get a bit of a better settlement and under the funding formula approach, we're stuck with what we've got. But if we don't do anything, we're just going to see that money drifting towards the specialist end of the sector, which will just create pressure on mainstream settings at the end of the day. So moving a child out of mainstream might give you a short-term, got a bit of behaviour out of the system, and I'm not having to manage that anymore and all the pressures that came with it. But actually, if we're all doing it all of the time, the money just starts to gradually shift towards that end of the system. And that's a real challenge that we've got. So you're dead right, absolutely. So there aren't any easy answers to any of this. This is just the latest, well actually it's the end of October, so we're almost ready for a new one of these, but this is the latest sort of position we're at around SEN, and I want to put this up there just to highlight a few things to you so you can go through so you can see what's happening in the system. Top left is how many requests for education, health and care plans we get. At the moment we are looking at around between, depends on the month of the year, but between 30 and 50 new requests for education, health and care plans every month. So that creates a pressure all on its own, because we have to decide whether we think that's an assessment we need to do, and then if we do decide that, we need to make sure that assessment happens. Unsurprisingly, the vast majority of those come from Y6, because it's parents who they've been happy during the primary phase, but are really apprehensive about whether their child can cope in secondary. And so what they're pushing for is the EHC plan so they can request a special school place for secondary, which, as Dean will tell you from his colleagues in the Special Heads Partnership, is creating huge pressure on secondary special school places. It's a real challenge. So we're managing some of that. We've still got too high a percentage of parents coming through and making those requests independently of the school. And that reflects for us a breakdown in relationships somewhere, and actually parental requests don't help us very much because they never come with the right level of information attached to them for us to make a decision. So we will often push those back to the school and to the SENCO and say you need to go and have a conversation and actually make sure this is the right thing to be doing. And that's why my plan is in there. So some of you may have started using my plan already. We really need localities to get up to speed on my plan and using that. That's your option instead of an EHC. Some of you, I think, I've had questions before about can we use our IEPs, the individual education plans or individual learner plans that some of you have used in the past. The answer to that, you can. My plan's not statutory, we can't make you use it. What we think is the beauty of my plan is two things. One, it's very parent focused, so it's transparent. It gives parents confidence that there is a plan that recognises some need, is doing something about it and is aiming to achieve something at the end of any sort of interventions. And it also provides you with a really good foundation for then stepping up to an EHC plan for those children and young people that we think that's the right thing to do. And the My Plan will become that referral paperwork for an EHC plan. And if we've done that right, the My Plan contains all the information you need to make the decision, so we can cut the journey to an EHC plan down by 6 weeks, because that first 6 weeks is all about gathering information. If it's coming in on a My Plan, we've already got it. So we can reduce the time frame quite considerably in terms of moving somebody from non-statutory support through into statutory support. Part of the challenge with that is helping parents understand that actually an EHC plan doesn't mean you're going to get more money attached to your kid. That's not how it works. That's not how the system works. Maybe some schools need to understand that as well, I don't know. Top right, that's just showing of all the new plans that we've had. Anything to the right of those first two columns are late. Now you've got a 2-month breakdown there, so what you'll see at the very end there is between September and October we had over 90 plans in September that were more than 60 weeks late, and they're meant to take 20. We've reduced that massively by half between September and October. The team are working, pulling out all the stops to try and get that backlog done, because part of the challenge with that backlog is it's stopping us getting the new plans right, and so you just end up constantly perpetuating the problem. The target is to clear everything to the right of those first two columns by the end of this month. I think we're probably going to miss that by about 40 cases, but on the whole it's going to be done, which means that we can start next year on a much better footing Our plan on time figure, that is the published figure, and it's a calendar, so at the moment it's still last year's figure, not this year's, is 3% of our plans were completed within that 20-week timescale, which made us pretty much the last in the country at doing this right. And it's not going to show much better for this year, but the reason that is because as we clear all those backlogs, obviously it takes that figure down, because every single one of those late plans that we clear then acts against us. So it hides the in-year figure, whereas in-year actually we're now at an average of 24 weeks for completing new plans. So it's getting better, significantly better. Bottom left is the conversion. So this is statements to plan conversions that we have to do. We are over halfway through the conversion time frame, so that finishes in March 2018. We haven't yet got halfway through all the conversions, so there's a massive challenge there. So we've done just under 800, and there's just over 1,300 left to do, with about 15 months to do them. The biggest challenge with all of those is that, particularly in mainstream, every time you do a conversion, you're asking a parent, are you happy with your current school place, or would you like to go somewhere else? Just by default, that's what the process will ask. So anybody with a statement in mainstream who's being converted, we are giving them, in effect, an opportunity to say, no, I'm fed up, I want to go to special. Or actually, if they're in special, I'm fed up and I want to go out of city to something, you know, that looks nice and leafy and has got all this wonderful stuff that apparently we can't do in the city, or that somebody's told them would be better for their child, because the marketing from some of those providers is pretty impressive, I have to say. So that's a real challenge just within the conversion process, that if we're not having a conversation and working with our families and they're feeling a bit disgruntled, quite at that point we suddenly find the pressure on special school places in particular goes up. And the bottom right just shows that we're already seeing that. So the blue line is us, the red line is national, and that's a percentage of people with EHC plans who are in special school settings. So in Sheffield it's just over 46 at the moment, nationally it's 39, so we have more of our parents pushing for special school places when they've got EHC plans compared to nationally. If you put the core cities figure on there, theirs is ever so slightly higher than ours, so we're doing a little bit better than the rest of the core cities. And you have to factor in some things like we do not give statements or plans for HI and VI, whereas lots of other places do. So there is some of that difference is because we have less EHC plans, so you would expect a greater percentage of them to be in special school. But that doesn't account for all of that difference. And we are increasingly beginning to see, particularly with that Y6 pressure for requests for EHC plans, that I think that will go up again this year. It's looked like it's dropped in this last year. I think it'll probably go the other way. So that's the sort of challenges that we're facing within the SEN system as a whole. When you add into that the funding pressure, so we've got 3.5 million pressure in the high needs funding block. You get 2.1 million of that, so the pressure is bigger than the amount that we hand out to mainstream schools as part of the locality funding. So within the current SEN business case, we're carrying a pressure of 1.5 million for 17-18, but because we've already got approximately 100 placements over those that we'd allocated for special schools, that adds in another £2 million pressure. Because as soon as we're over the numbers that the EFA know that we've got in our special schools, the whole cost of that place is funded from the high needs budget, not just the high needs bit of that place, the whole cost of that place. So that creates a huge pressure, and the EFA haven't for the last 2 or 3 years allowed us to put our numbers up. We've tried, but they've said we haven't made a case to do that, so we're still carrying the same allocated numbers to our schools that we had 2 or 3 years ago, and that's just compounding the funding pressure that we've already talked about. The point to make on that, I just remind everybody, even with the locality model, the council still retains the statutory responsibility for securing special needs provision within an EHC plan, and it also has the responsibility for handing out the high needs budget. Now, we've chosen to do that through the locality model that all of you are part of, in terms of allocating 2.1 million out on a proportional SEN basis. But that ultimate responsibility still lies with us, so that we're the ones that find ourselves in front of tribunal if a parent's not happy and chooses to challenge. And that's how it should be. We're not asking schools to take that statutory responsibility from us. We are asking you to cooperate with us in how we secure that provision, if that makes sense, which is what you are required to do by the Code of Practice. Briefly on the locality funding, again, this may be very familiar. This slide's been around for quite some time now. That's how the money is currently divided up across localities. So there's a total pot of 2.1. We gave you 75,000 each as a locality up front to do some prep work with that and some baseline work. C&D funding, if you had the old band C&D funded children in your schools, you will have still got that money for that individual, but that will change as they leave the setting. So if you've got someone in primary school with a C, when they leave primary school, that bit of that money for band C will go back into the overall money for allocation around the city. And I think there's quite a big change coming. I think we've got quite a few C&Ds moving settings at the end of this academic year, so that will release further money into localities. So what was left at the end of that is 1.3 million for passing out between the localities. We did that for the April to August allocation, the 512 based on the January census. We were going to do the September and March on the Sheffield support grid, and you'd all gone through the support grid and identified your levels 3, 4s and 5s. When the task force and then the school forum looked at that, they had enough doubts about how robust that process had been to say we're not sure it's quite right yet. So we've reverted back to the January census. So that's one key change there that may not have filtered through, is that the 7 to 12 allocation will be based on the January census figures. There is now a lot of work going on to make sure we use the grid properly, so that actually from April we can allocate using that money, because the January census, if I was being cynical, is quite easy to manipulate and we wouldn't know you'd done it, whereas the grid, it's a lot more open and a lot more transparent, and so we would like, and the grid focuses on those with the more complex needs, whereas the January census is just everybody with SEN, not all of whom will be drawing from that £2.1 million because they won't need to. So it's a more refined measure, I think. So that's where we are with that. In terms of have I got my money yet, there is now an agreed, hi, welcome. There is now an agreed process which has been communicated out to localities for how localities can draw down the money, because most localities we're holding the money as the banker and you need to tell us when you spent it and we're passing that money out. There has been some confusion about that process that now exists. It's been communicated, and if we have the evidence against that process that we need, the money will be in the December allocations to schools. If we haven't got that, then it won't be. So you should be seeing that money, assuming you've gone through this process with your locality and with us, in this month's allocations. And then the couple of things we're saying I want to get onto now in terms of where we're going next. The Inclusion Task Force is a big piece of locality working in the inclusion strategy. I think if Stephen was in the room, he would be telling you it's probably the fundamental bit of the jigsaw, that without which we're not going to make any of the rest of it work. Partly that's because it's a school-led task force, so it's your colleagues who are leading that. On it, it's chaired by Ian Reid, who's the head teacher from Watercliff. All the locality lead head teachers are on that, and because they're all primary head teachers, we've also asked for a secondary head teacher representative, which is Leslie Bowes. 2 special school teachers. Is that you? Are you one of those, Dean? It's Sasha and it's Sasha. I can't remember who the other one is. And then some of the locality Senkos are on that as well, plus ourselves. And we're looking to expand that membership a little bit to bring in some of that health and that social care expertise into that mix as well. That's the group of people that will be challenging, is our practice good in our schools? Are we using the Sheffield support grid as intended? Are we all using it in the same way, so that when we actually do that allocation from April, we're all confident that everybody has applied the Sheffield support grid in the same way, because that confidence wasn't there last time round. It will go beyond that. It will start to provide quite a support and challenge function as well. And for us, I think there's something quite powerful about schools challenging schools rather than the council standing at the front of meetings like this and telling you you're not doing it right, because hey, what do I know? I'm from the DFE. I don't know very much about education practice in schools. I've never done it. You guys are the experts, but actually having yourselves challenging each other and having those conversations between yourselves, I think is a better way of doing this than the council just trying to cajole you into doing stuff. That's also the point of within that is the citywide moderation, so them checking across the piece. And a lot of the concerns around the support grid and the allocation of funding that came up through localities were, what if we do it differently to somebody else? And that's precisely why the task force is there, to make sure we're all doing it the same way. So we can realise that vision that wherever you are in the city, whichever school you go to, as a parent or as a child, if you have a need, you can look on that grid and go, well, my need's that. We've all agreed it's that, so that's the package of provision I should be being provided in my school, wherever I am in the city. Yes, it'll be slightly tailored to who I am as an individual, but that's, in general terms, the package of provision. And that's partly because we've got parents making choices about travelling right across the city because they look at school over there and say that does SEN really well and my local school doesn't, so I'm going to make that choice to travel all the way across the city. So then you've got those schools then worrying about, actually, if I advertise I'm really good at SEN, then the whole world's going to want to come here, and that creates pressures on their budget. So we end up spending a fortune on transport. So our transport budget is just over 4 million at the moment, transporting kids around the city. Now, some of those, you know, they're going up to places like Talbot, and they've got very complex needs. They are always going to need transporting, and that's absolutely fine. We've got a huge amount of others that actually it's because of parental choice, because they're not confident in what's available locally. So there's, you know, even if we reduce that budget by half and put that money back into the locality pot, that's going to make a massive difference to what we've got available to us to support the children that we're working with. So quite a lot to play for in all of that. We're doing a lot of work with health. I think, based on conversations with DFE and some of my colleagues around the region as well, who are leading on this stuff, I think we've probably got one of the better relationships with health now across many different councils. It was always the challenge when we put the reforms together. How do we bring health into this and make them play their part? I think we're doing well in Sheffield. It wasn't so good when I arrived, but I think we've made some real inroads and worked with them really well. So they have really bought into the whole idea of locality working. So Sheffield's clinical commissioning group that commissions health services for Sheffield have committed, A, to being part of the inclusion programme board, and B, to saying locality working is the way we want to go. So two things around that, as well as some of the existing mechanisms we've got in place to make sure they're contributing to those more complex cases. But we're doing two other things. One is that around joint commissioning and pooled budgets, so actually working very closely together to say, what does that, if we know what our need looks like across the city, going back to those earlier slides, what do we need to commission to make sure we've got the right places and the right support? And can we pool our budgets? Because a huge lot of the arguments we have are about who's going to pay. If it's all in one budget, it doesn't matter because we've all contributed and we just draw it from that budget. So we are pushing hard to arrive at pooled budgets to help with some of that. So if you've got those very complex key children or young people in your schools that get funding from different sources, actually we'll just pull it from that pooled budget and we can stop having arguments, which would be really helpful. And the other thing they're doing is the Community Child Healthcare Programme, or Community Paediatrics as it says on there. So they're actually beginning to look at how they can put their support for children's health actually into a locality or a community basis rather than it being all centrally held at the Children's Hospital. So they're already beginning to commit in the way they're looking at that to a locality way of working. Almost done. Next steps. There's a whole range of things that we still need to do. I think we've made some really good progress. It's been very challenging. It's not been the easiest thing in the world to do. But locality working is now becoming established. Yes, localities are still at different points on that journey. But I think over the next 6 months we're going to see everybody beginning to catch up to the same place, doing things like starting to make those requests to assess decisions at a local level rather than at a central level. The task force will be all about the good inclusive practice and challenging poor practice, as we've said. We already have Rowan Outreach Service at primary for children with autism, and we're asking Dean and Mossbrook, we're in conversation with them about whether they can also provide one as well, so that will expand that capacity in addition to what we already provide through our central autism team. A whole lot of work going around, or conversation started at the moment, around how do integrated resource units fit into this locality model. So some localities then B don't have any, some have 2 or 3. So what's that look like? What's the role of an integrated resource unit? And if we've got a high percentage of ASD, you know, are our resource units focused on the right need across the city, and are they actually acting as a resource for the locality, or do they act as a resource for the city? And those are the sort of questions that we've started to unpack and explore with schools that have resource units in them at the moment. Started that last week. Some work going around developing the alternative provision and how might that fit with the locality model. We are bringing together the Children with Disability team and the SEN team, which is going to make things a lot more easy in terms of those children and young people that have social care needs alongside their SEN, and actually we're going to have one team that's looking at that rather than having two that don't seem to talk to each other even though they're only one floor apart in the building. That's the way it is sometimes, so that's going on. One thing to say is that Karen Halford, head of SEN, is leaving at the end of this month, so we're currently recruiting for her replacements. Health stuff around community and neighbourhood based services. The other thing Health are doing is they're looking at GPs working in neighbourhoods, so actually groups of GPs and actually dividing the city up into neighbourhoods. So again, you've got a neighbourhood with a set of GPs that work for that neighbourhood, which again fits better with the locality way of working. So they're really on board with this. And we need to develop some key progress indicators. So we all know how we're doing, but also when Ofsted turn up to inspect Ofsted and CQC, we'll do an area inspection on SEN. We've got something to be able to show them we know how we're doing, and this is the performance data that we use on a regular basis. There's a huge amount of stuff in there, all of which takes me to my last slide, which is this is a very risky strategy. And what we're really saying is two things. One is we need to do a step change in how we deliver and what our provision looks like and the practice we've got that drives a change in parental confidence. And if we don't achieve those two things, then we're not going to achieve anything that we're aiming for. And if we don't achieve that, then you head into risk two, which is actually we keep hemorrhaging money from the school's budget, which starts to put under threat our ability to meet our statutory duty as the council to secure sufficient education provision for all children and young people in our area, not just those with SEN. And actually that's the challenge we've got. And we've been clear with Councillor Drayton that we feel this is an all or nothing challenge. You could do some of it, but actually you won't get any of the reward for doing some of it. If you do all of it, you'll get all the reward. So in that sense, it's high risk and goes back to the point that we've got a real challenge here because we're not in a position to do this in the way we'd like to have done, which is actually invest in one end before you stop investing in the other end. We've got to try and do both at the same time, and that is not easy. So we are very conscious that this is a high-risk strategy. We need to stay on top of it. We need everybody to get on board with it, and we almost just need to get on with it and make it work. The challenge with some of the questions you might ask is, what's the alternative? And I think we've been round that conversation over the last 2 years with School Forum and with schools and with working groups. We don't think there is one, unless the government starts to throw more money at us, which is not happening anytime soon. So we don't think there is an alternative to this way of working. We have to make our money work better and harder for us and for the children that we're supporting. And we think this is the best way to do it. Time will tell whether we achieve that and achieve what we want to do. This is a 5-year strategy in terms of the council's budgetary conversations. I think it's probably longer in terms of changing the culture and the way we work and changing the way parents and families perceive the system and respond to us in the system. So it's not easy times. But that's the slides done. Let's do some questions. Yes?
It's an observation more than a question, really. And I like the financial pressures are bleak.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think Headship needs to be aware of, and I'm not even sure that you're actually aware of, Alasdaire, is that I met with Rebecca Mason yesterday, and the 7/12 funding that's going to be allocated to schools is potentially going to be cut by 10%.
Mm-hmm.
There's a proposal at Schools Forum for that to happen on the 14th of December. So actually the increased pressure for mainstream schools to support SEND children is going to be even more intense because the money that we were promised isn't actually going to be the money that we'll receive because of that 10% cut.
Yeah. Yes, that is being mooted. That's
more than being mooted.
Well, the School Forum have to make that decision.
I think
you
it's
know,
a highlight.
Yeah, and a number of things to say about it. One is it's not a surprise. We've been telling School Forum about this budget pressure for 2 years. It's always, if you look back at any of the stuff we've always said, we may need to make some in-year adjustments to this to manage some of the budget pressures.
It's a surprise to the Inclusion Task Force too. It is because that sits on it.
Yeah, fair enough. But if you go back and look at the conversations that have been had with schools and with Schools Forum, it shouldn't be, because we've always said we might need to do this. And it's going back to the 800,000 overspend in the high needs budget that we've got in year. This is about managing that in-year pressure. It's £500 a school if you work it out. So it's not a massive hit on an individual school. So again, it depends on which way you look at it, but the forum have got to make that decision. The forum manage the school budget, there is a pressure on the school budget, they have to make a decision about how they want to handle that. Again, what's our alternative? So that's part of the conversation, has to be if there's a better idea out there for how we can do this, we're more than willing to listen to it, but at the moment we're not getting that.
I just think heads need to be aware that
Yeah,
there's
no,
a 10%
absolutely.
cut in the budget,
Yeah.
and they're not going to perhaps get the allocation that they were anticipating.
Can I applaud Alasdaire for setting up that inclusion task force? I'm hoping that all localities are getting their reps to those meetings, because that's obviously the forum in which we can, as head teachers, make our voices heard and feelings known.
Absolutely.
But my question would be how MAST fits in with all of this and the inclusion strategy. There's a lot of confusion because MAST seems to be communicating directly with schools and head teachers, for instance, about a meeting that's going to be held as it next Monday. And there's confusion about how the MAST strategy is fitting in with the inclusion strategy. Can you help us?
Yes, I can help you in theory. I think there's probably, as ever, work to do on the practice. But so we've written an inclusion blueprint that is overseeing sort of the internal mechanics of how we're delivering this as the council, and they are very much part of that. So the whole MAST strategy is very much part of the inclusion strategy. Dawn Walton, who is now the director or acting director for that side of social care, sits on the inclusion programme board, and Master has to report into that on occasion. They report into it anyway every month as a monthly update, but they are actually asked to come and turn up and tell us how things are going on a reasonably regular basis. So we very much see them as part of this multi-agency locality way of working. So if we've got health out there, we've got MAST out there, we've got SEN out there, we've got children with disabilities out there, actually it's a genuinely multi-agency approach, working with schools and partnership with schools to put the right support in place for children and families. And some of what when we developed the reforms, the reason we changed the behaviour, emotional, social difficulties definition to social, emotional, mental health was because what we were seeing is a huge amount of evidence that was saying kids who just have behaviour issues, now there are lots of reasons why kids have behaviour issues, but they were automatically being labelled as SEN. Whereas actually if you've got MAST in the mix, you're starting to say actually no, that behaviour is resulting from what's going on at home, in the family, or whatever else the context they're in is driving the behaviour, not the fact that they've got an inherent learning difficulty or they've got autism or whatever. And we need MAST in that mix so we can do the right identification of what's needed. And sometimes actually MAST can then support the SEN. So if the SEN is creating sleep problems at home, they can help parents with that and help manage that. There's sort of practices that help with sleep patterns and things like that. We need to be working together. It's not obviously clear at the moment that is happening on the ground, but I certainly think locality C, I don't know if any of you from C have started to look at how do they bring the sort of decision making that MAST does around support together with the decision making around SEN. I think there's a bit of a review about how MAST do that now, so that I think that might be put on hold a little bit, but that's always been in C's vision, is to bring that decision making process together around the locality. So yes.
Localities would urge that if something is working well in a particular locality, that is then rolled out by MAST or whoever's rolling it out really, across all the localities rather than having a sort of pilot approach.
Yes, and that's what we want the task force to be doing, is being out there identifying what is working well and actually then bringing that back and say we just need to get everybody doing this, because some of it will be it works well because it's that locality and that's how they operate. Some of it will be this will work well wherever you did it.
Any more questions for Alasdaire?
Thank you.
Rapturous applause, I guess, Alasdaire.
I wasn't expecting rapturous applause. Don't worry.
Oh, you have to tend to deliver, but thank you so much. The calm and considered way in which you deliver it actually, keeps us all a little bit calmer than we might be on these sorts of occasions. So thank you, Alasdaire, for that update, and hope to see you again soon. I know you're dashing off. Thank you very much indeed. Can I introduce Sean? Now, Sean Finch from... you've changed your name, Sean, haven't you? Are you... No, not you personally. I meant.
Oh, yeah.
I meant who you're representing. You are from
Yes.
Ambition School Leadership.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and you're formerly teaching leaders. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Would you like to come? You weren't here when I explained earlier that you would need to stand at the lectern so that the camera can pick you up if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm aware that it might come across a bit talky, so if you've got any sort of opinions, questions, anything like that, just chip in and I'll stop and I can address anything you might want to ask. So we've changed our name, not me, to Ambition School Leadership. So we were formerly Teaching Leaders and the Future Leaders Trust, and as of November we've come together as one organisation. So this morning I'm just going to sort of give you a brief update about that process of us joining up, and hopefully by the end help you identify middle leaders or senior leaders who you feel are in a position for development, starting from 2017. And yeah, you'll see things circulating around. That's all our programs, and if you're interested, just sign up and then I can sort of get in contact with you. Like I said, ask any questions throughout this whole process. So like our former organisations, we are funded by the National College. Our purpose is to provide leadership development courses to different leaders in schools, both secondary and primary. Just introduce myself. My name is Sean. I'm a schools partnerships manager, so I'm the person that talks to heads and then helps them identify people that might be suitable for our programs. Okay, so I thought I'd start just with why leadership, why are we a charity, an organisation which focuses on leadership. When coming together, we thought it was logical, it made sense. We're both leadership development charities. A lot of people got confused with us. They're like, are you future leaders? Are you teaching leaders? Where are you from? So when we came together, it made sense. It's like a logical step. Teaching Leaders was created out of Future Leaders, and Future Leaders was obviously a sister charity to Teach First, so it's all sort of shared history. And why leadership? I suppose it's that top one, really. So education achievement is not equal. So in 2015, only a third of disadvantaged students got 5 or more GCSEs at C or above, and that was double for non-disadvantaged students. Now the government's done a little bit more work around opportunity areas or achieving excellence areas that you might be aware of, and they've found that for those who spend 80% of their time in secondary school on free school meals, they make 20 months less progress than their wealthier counterparts. So our driving force is about addressing educational disadvantage through leadership, and this is where leadership comes in. So it's proven through many studies that effective school leadership has a life-changing impact on students. And that's everything from a classroom leader, because teachers themselves are leaders of their classrooms, all the way up to MAT CEOs and everyone in between. Leadership can have a substantial impact on the outcomes for students. But there aren't enough, particularly in Yorkshire and the North West. I'm based in Manchester, but I sort of cover West and South Yorkshire, as well as Hull. Retainment is a problem, and finding those leaders that are skilled enough to do the right things in the right schools face the biggest challenges. And obviously that sort of succession planning is becoming more and more important for senior leaders, thinking about what talent do they have, how can they nurture that talent, and make sure that as people sort of move up and move on to different schools, they have the leaders which are going to make the biggest impact. So, the middle leaders that are nominated by head teachers, or senior leaders that are nominated by head teachers, to our programmes can expect this sort of top-level summary, where it's about the pupils, having an impact on the pupils, developing the leadership skills of the teachers and making sure that they're equipped to have the biggest impacts that they can have, and also for the schools, retention. So our programmes vary from 1 to 2 years in length, and during that time, because we're wanting to impact disadvantaged students in their schools, we ask them to make a commitment to that school for that full duration of the programme. Have I lost anyone yet? Is anyone going, I've never heard of any of these organisations, I'm not really sure what you're on about? No? Yeah? Maybe? There you go.
A little bit, yeah.
Um,
We're all right.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll answer some questions at the end as well. So our ambition is we're working for a fair society built on an education system where every child can thrive no matter what their background. So this is key because the students and the schools that we work with are schools, we do have an eligibility criteria, and that's based on EVA 6. So not all schools are eligible. We're sort of targeting those schools where we can have the biggest impact, where students need talented leaders the most. Our mission, we are building a network of exceptional school leaders at all levels to transform the lives of children who need it most. And what do we provide? Well, we provide world-class leadership development where people on the programme have access to ex-school leaders, MAT CEOs and professional coaches. Now this is where the cringy name drop comes in. We work with people like Baroness Sally Morgan. We have Alison Peacock, who has helped us with our merger. We have Kevin Collins. Russell Hobby was key in our primary programme and putting that together and mapping where development needs to happen and what that programme might look like. And locally, Libby Nichols, Reach 4, she's a big supporter of ours. She's spoken at our events. We're doing a lot of work with Reach 4. Vicky Beer and Tessa Mason. So she's sort of based up at BDAP in Bradford, also works across Yorkshire as well. So we've got some people that have helped us develop this and they're experienced. So our network in Sheffield, I've come here because I do want to build the Sheffield network. These are the schools that we're currently working with in different capacities. So they might be in a primary programme, or they might have done one of those programmes that you can see in front of you. But we do want to embed that relationship and build it. We've recently sort of created a partnership with Reach 4, for example, and they're expanded in Sheffield and Barnsley and Rotherham, and that eventually will mean our sort of presence will grow in Sheffield. But compared to other local authorities that we find, Sheffield has sort of grown slower, and we want to sort of build that and sort of get you guys plugged into this network that we have of talented leaders. So what you can see here is Sheffield has been identified as an achieving excellence everywhere local authority. I'm not sure what the government's calling it now, it seems to change all the time, but this was earlier this year. So that's areas where there's low social mobility and there's other sort of indicators as well. And they've sort of encouraged us to engage with schools in Sheffield, in Doncaster, in Bradford, in Salford, to nurture that leadership talent to have an impact on social mobility for students. And as part of that, and I'll go into pricing a little bit later on, we're able to offer an Achieving Excellence area, so it's a bit of a different acronym, leadership talent subsidy for primary schools, where alongside the National College subsidising our programmes, we're able to subsidise our primary direct to year 2, which I'll explain in a minute, programme by 50%, so it's £500 as opposed to £1,000 for the year-long programme. Before we move on, is anyone from any of these schools? No. So the programmes that we offer, and hopefully programmes which will be of interest to you and your leaders, you've got it in front of you, but I've just sort of taken the headship, the middle and senior leadership and first leadership role. I'll put this in here. These are 2-year-long programmes. The Future Leaders and the Teaching Leaders are the sort of flagship programmes. These are the selective programmes where people have to apply to get onto the programme. And this is for the teaching leaders, high potential middle leaders looking to increase their impact in both primary and secondary. Now the content of our programmes is a mix of twilight seminars. So for example, the secondary programme, if you had a head of English that you felt needed development and you wanted to put them on this 2-year programme, they would have access to 9 twilight seminar sessions. They'd also have 9 coaching sessions over the 2 years, and these coaches are people that are ex-SLT themselves. We also have a residential element where they get to go on a week-long residential in the summer and they get to meet the network of middle leaders that they're working with. and they get to really think about their vision for the school and what sort of project they want to implement in the school. So that project drives the whole programme. They come up with what's called an impact initiative. So that might be, as head of English, you might think about raising the attainment of working class white boys in your year 11 group, and that really drives over the 2 years the work that they do. So along with Twilight seminars, coaching sessions, a residential element, they get access to a national network of middle leaders. So you have people in Bristol sharing best practice with people in Sheffield, sharing best practice with people in Sunderland. There is that national feel to it, and they have access to an online platform where they can share resources, best practice. And the commitment is for 2 years at your school. So I'm sort of really drawing attention to this teaching leaders one. I'm not sure if you've got any names of middle leaders in your head now that you think would benefit from something like this. On the flip side, we also have the Future Leaders Programme, and now that's for senior leaders. It follows a very similar model, but that's a 2-year commitment, thinking about their role as a senior leader and how they can have an impact across the school, across middle leaders and students. And that's really for people who are in a senior leadership position who would like to become a head teacher within the next 2 to 3 years. And again, they join this network and share resources and have access to a wealth of other senior leaders and their peers. I'm whizzing quite through it. Okay. So next steps, if you are interested, I know this has been really fast and really top level, and you might be a bit like, I don't 100% understand the programme. Please write your name on there and I will contact you and give you some follow-up information. I'm aware that it's only 15 minutes that I've had a chance to present. In order to put people on our programmes, we have a nomination process where if you were a head teacher, for example, you would pass on the names of middle leaders you would like to officially nominate to the programme. In terms of costing, as I said, the National College do subsidise our programmes quite significantly. So this is 20% of the actual cost of what it should be. The National College subsidise it by 80%. So if you had a primary middle leader, so a key stage leader, and you're interested in accessing this, it would be £1,000 for the full 2 years. So that's that. Residential, the seminars, access to a professional coach, access to all the other sort of middle leader network and movement that happens there. Like I said, because Sheffield is an achievement excellence area, if you want to put people directly onto the second year, so that might be someone who's new to, in primary's case, new to maybe an assistant head, where middle leadership, senior leadership, sometimes, depending on the size of your school, those skills can be quite blurred. Or it might be someone who's been a middle leader for 3-4 years, and you really want to push, stretch, challenge them. That would be £500 for the 1 year programme. So we'd like to think that as a charity we can offer prices which you would expect to come from a charity. And then for secondary teaching leaders, which is your middle leaders, that's £4,000 for the full 2 years, and that breaks down to £2,000 per year. I got an email this morning about Future Leaders programmes clarifying the price. So for senior leaders it would be £2,000 per year for the 2 years, or £1,500 per year if you were a primary senior leader. So they're the next steps. This is my email, so sean.finch@ambitionschoolleadership.org.uk. That's my mobile number, my work number, if you want to contact me and ask me any questions. I'm going to assume if you've signed up on that, you don't mind receiving a bit of information, and I can tell you a bit more about the eligibility criteria, etc. Because I haven't really gone into that. But that was really fast, a lot of information. Is there any questions about it? Or why we've joined together or anything like that? No? Has anyone shown any initial interest in developing their leaders?
No, we don't want to do that.
Okay, thank you.
That really just, I know you've went through it, but that really just fit what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've got.
Chris, you got a question?
It's just an observation. I totally understand that you're working within the criteria of the is it 50%?
Yeah, and if it goes lower than 50%, we look at the attainment of disadvantaged pupils.
Yeah. So, and I know why that's there, because we're trying to target those areas for the reasons you flashed up at the start.
Yeah.
That excludes a lot of the people that are sitting in here in their schools.
Right.
And my worry is there's a number of schools in the city that don't hit that criteria, but have got amazing people who would benefit from that and would probably then move on into the areas that they're really needed.
Yeah.
With having been trained and prepared already. And I just wonder whether there's some way of accessing that with people who are thinking along those lines, with a commitment from them that they will then move into those areas. To those areas.
In terms of
I know you can't do that, but
accessing it and then with the promise to move into those areas. I don't know if it would necessarily work like that.
But people might promise and then not do it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It just there's a lot of people who are quite brilliant who don't work in schools that fit into that criteria, so they're being missed from this programme. But it just seems to me there's a little bit of closing the barn door once the horse is bolted, so the people who are in these schools, they might move into a school in a really challenging area, not being equipped for the leadership role that they may move into, and then they're playing catch up. Rather than being well equipped first, then moving.
That's absolutely right, and that's the reason why I've just said to Sean actually that Learn Sheffield will be in touch. I was thinking exactly the same thing, Chris, and I do know that different localities are crying out for this sort of stuff. Every locality, all of our 7 localities, has something on their action plan about leadership and about this sort of thing. But it's how we make that fit.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have to have an eligibility. We have to at some sort of point. I'm not supposed to say
it's a specific programme. A need.
But eligibility is flexible.
Yeah.
So we do start at 50% free school meals, but we're aware that, especially recently, not all parents register their students for free school meals. So that might not reflect the school's data, which is. I found that when I was a teacher, I found that a lot. There's a lot of students in my classes that were missed off that and should have been on that. So we then sort of look at disadvantaged pupils' progress, and if they're making less than the national average, or if they're making significantly lower than their non-disadvantaged peers, then it would mean that school is eligible.
Okay.
So we go down to 20% free school meals as well. It's just as you start moving down, different eligibility criteria comes in. Bobby, is your name on the list?
Yeah, put my name on.
Yeah.
We are so far out of your criteria.
Oh, right, okay.
As are a number of the schools in the room, but actually I can see from the nods around the room that there are people in the room that would be quite interested, but are concerned that they're not meeting the criteria. So can we follow that through with you, Sean, on behalf of the schools, because we do know who they are. We can come back to you.
Great.
That's
Thank you very
We
much.
certainly will be in touch. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I think we're on track, Jane, aren't we, to finish at 10. If I'm going to give a quick update from Learn Sheffield, and then you're going to do a quick 15 minutes to finish for 10 o'clock.
It doesn't do 15 minutes, but yes.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sean. I know you've got to get off to get your train, but thank you so much. You've
No, thank you.
created quite a bit of interest there, and we will be back in touch with you. Thank you. Okay, primary achievement strategy. Okay, Chris. I did invite you earlier to come up and have a chat about that. We haven't really a lot of time right now, have we? But I think the key things to know here, in terms of the primary achievement strategy, we now have a steering group. Names of the members listed up there. We're starting to meet with greater frequency, aren't we, Chris? I think
next week.
We've had a few meetings in the last week, so things are, as you'd expect, things are picking up in pace, and we are getting there. And just really to flag up to you that watch out for information from the Primary Achievement Steering Group. Around the three things that obviously are listed at the bottom here, Diane is leading on behalf of Learn Sheffield on the sort of statutory LA moderation processes. So if you're hearing from Diane, it will tend to be about statutory LA moderation. If you're hearing from Chris, I think you've already heard from Chris about predicted outcomes for 2017. If you're hearing from Chris, then the focus will be on locality assessment and support of locality practice. Do you want to put anything in there, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, a number of people and localities, not all localities sent people, but sent potentially a locality assessment leads to a meeting that we had last week, and we just outlined to them what the remit was. And to put it in a nutshell, there is a kind of a tie into the statutory stuff, because it's another vehicle for sharing information. You get the information out there about statutory process, but that's not the main point of that group at all. The main point is to work with those people, sharing, we feel like sharing the best practice, getting ideas into localities and disseminating those ideas, things like lessons learned from last year. I mean, we were very honest, that the whole point of it is to improve outcomes at the end of the year. That's what it's about. But you can do that by working together, looking at what are the key things that people, it's not a countdown to success, but practice that might help across the authority in terms of improving outcomes for children. And then looking at best practice in terms of ongoing assessment, using that information to inform learning, all those kind of things, very much aimed at improving outcomes at the end. The other side of that, one of the things we'd like to do with that group as well is to get greater consistency and understanding across the authority about just what is working towards, what is expected, what is greater than, because there's wild inconsistencies at the moment, and I know a lot of authorities are starting to, localities and groups within localities are starting to work at the moment, putting together portfolios, moderated examples. But one thing that this group can do is do that for the authority, not coming from Learn Sheffield or from Sheffield Authority, but from that group, and within that group, all these people from these different localities have come together and we've looked at and said, you know what, this child is cuspy, just on the edge of being expected, and if they just did this, and this, they'd be nailed on at expected. This child is only just expected and they need to work on. And it's just giving examples like that for people, because there were some blatantly obvious things last year in schools that moderators came and fed back that we weren't doing. I'm saying we, my school too, we weren't doing, that would have made a huge difference to our outcomes. So it's just working along those lines. Okay.
So thank you for that, Chris, and you are going to be meeting quite regularly now with the locality assessment leads. Can I just emphasise that locality assessment leads don't necessarily have to be trained LA moderators. They are people who are keen to sort of network really within their localities or families. And I might also emphasise that actually localities have sent different numbers of locality assessment leads. So some localities are sending a locality assessment lead from each family because they've chosen to work in families rather than full localities. Other localities may send one lead for Key Stage 2 and one lead for Key Stage 1. It really does not matter, but I think the key thing is knowing, Chris, that some localities were not represented at the meeting last Friday. The key thing for me is that if your locality has not got reps at that meeting, you're missing a trick really, because that's where the best practice will be shared, that's where the top tips will be shared, and those locality leads, assessment leads, will be used to communicate that to schools within your localities. We are hoping to reach every single school within the city through this strategy. So please check that you are well represented within your localities at the regular meeting, that if you're not sure, please do encourage heads, other colleagues to get in touch with Chris it's head teacher at Greystones, isn't it, Chris? But we've had good response from schools in terms of their predicted outcomes for next year, and we will be looking at those responses at the Primary Improvement Board meeting with your primary improvement partners next Tuesday, and we will be coming back to you, because obviously leading myself on bespoke support for targeted schools, we're hoping that the predicted outcomes will flag up where we need to be first and where the locality assessment leads need to be supporting first. So thanks for the great response, and we will be back in touch with you immediately at the start of the spring term. The other strand here is around really support, which I'm coordinating for particularly red and amber schools within your localities. So targeted support, there's been a lot of training recently at Sheffield on, I know it's probably the wrong time of year, and we've learned lessons actually recently, but for school evaluation, for Ofsted preparation, we've had some early years evaluation sessions, strategic development planning sessions, and those sessions have tended to be by invite. So if you've heard that some people have had an opportunity to come to Learn Sheffield and be a part of those free of charge, well, that's because they're likely to be from one of those targeted schools. So that's how we're working at the moment, and we are also seeking, I know some of you have attended some of those sessions, we're going to be seeking feedback on the impact of those sessions also. So that's the primary achievement strategy with its 3 strands. Okay, other quick updates. You've got some dates there for upcoming events. I just particularly want to draw your attention to the pupil mobility workshop. That has been planned in as a result of really requests from yourselves for sort of multi-agency consideration of really mobility issues. The request has come from schools, as you can imagine, with high mobility that are operating in very challenging circumstances that are not helped by, and some of them are in the room, that are not helped by the very high mobility. So this is an attempt at your request to consider the issues that those schools are facing. Everyone is welcome to come and input there, but you will be sitting around the table with representatives from lots of different agencies, housing, police, social care, etc. on that particular day. So it's consideration of the issues and some planning of better ways forward, how we can work together more effectively with heads to try and reduce the very detrimental impact of very high mobility. Of course, admissions reps, hopefully John, will be in attendance at that meeting also. So please take particular note of that. Sheffield Priority Action Plan. Some groups have already started, they've produced their plans and they're also already started working on their plans. Governors in particular have got their action plan that came out of the Sheffield Priorities Action Planning Day. They're working on it. Stephen and I are busy at the moment coordinating all the different plans that the groups are now working on, and we hope to put those together in one document that you can access early in the spring term. The autumn update will be with you. Realistically, it's not going to be with you before the end of term. It will be the start. There's no point saying that it is really. It will be with you. We'll be working on it over the holidays, and it'll be with you at the start of the new year. So they're just quick updates from myself. Sorry, Jane, I've eaten into your time, but welcome and thank you, Jane Campbell from Wildlife Trust, who's been so patiently waiting to come and talk to us. Thank you. I hope the updates have been helpful for you.
Yes, they've been very, very helpful. I've also been preserving my voice a little bit.
There you go.
So I'll be as quick as I can because I know that everyone's time poor and we want to get through these things. So my name's Jane Campbell, as you said. I'm from Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. Thank you ever so much for staying a bit longer to hear what I've got to say. I know it's cold and miserable out there and it doesn't really feel like the time of year to be thinking about outdoor learning. So I thought outdoor learning, why bother, was kind of a good title for a presentation at this time of year when you've got 1,000,001 other priorities. But actually, now's a really good time to be thinking ahead to next year about what you're actually going to be doing in terms of outdoor learning. So to recap, Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, we care for wild spaces across Sheffield and Rotherham. We care for them, for the people who use them, and for the wildlife that depends on them. And as part of that, we are absolutely passionate about the benefits of outdoor learning for young people and children. We work with thousands of children across Sheffield every year. And it's not easy, and sometimes we question why we do it, but we do it, like you guys, just like you guys. Is that a familiar story? But we do it because we see the impact that we have every day, just like you guys. So I thought I'd share a few of our insights, that we, things that we see on the ground every day, the difference that we make, just as a bit of inspiration for you, because ideally what we would love to see is a culture of everyday outdoor learning embedded in schools across Sheffield. So that's not us trying to sell you anything, that is simply us saying we would love it if you guys felt the same as we did, because you can understand the benefits too. So just to run through a few of the things that we see every day. So as I said, we work with schools across Sheffield and Rotherham to improve the quality of outdoor learning. One of the first things we see is that real-world experiences bring subjects alive. I'm sure you all know that, but if your children are learning about the Stone Age, get them throwing spears, get them lighting fires, get them building shelters. It is the best way to learn. And Ofsted agrees with us. I've got a lovely little quote here from 2008. It feels like a long time ago now, but it's still relevant. First-hand experiences can help make subjects more vivid and interesting for pupils and enhance their understanding. And that's Ofsted saying that, not me. So we see that every day. The second thing we see is for a particular subset of pupils, we see that they engage so much more when they're out in the outdoors than when they're in the classroom. They get a sense of freedom, they get their hands-on practical tasks, and suddenly their minds are free to engage in the learning in a way that just doesn't happen when they're inside the classroom. We also see the same thing happening with behaviour in the individual sessions themselves, but also over the longer term. When they've got that sense of freedom, when they've got that ability to lead with the skill sets that maybe don't shine in the classroom, suddenly that slightly disruptive behaviour evaporates. And actually we get teachers who are really surprised, saying these children are suddenly engaging in a way that they wouldn't when they're inside the classroom. And when behaviour improves, the whole class learns a lot more effectively than if you're also having to deal with behavioural issues as well. Obviously, if you're getting outdoors in your school every day, it's a really, really easy way of hitting your physical activity targets. And again, there's masses of evidence out there that shows that increased physical activity improves your learning outcomes. And I can talk to you about that another time if you want. Mental health is a really hot topic in schools at the moment, but actually if you look at a lot of the literature, it doesn't mention the outdoors at all. I mean, we're working with Chili Pep at the moment to explore the effectiveness of using the outdoors to help young people and children who've been identified as being at risk of mental health intervention. Now, those young people have come to us and said, we think the outdoors can help us, and we're helping them help themselves by getting out into the outdoors. It's a sanctuary for them, it's a release for them, and it allows them to regenerate and revitalise in a way which they cannot achieve indoors. So if you're considering resilience, if you're considering mental health as an issue in your school, please consider the outdoors and the value that that has. And finally, it's just an opportunity. I was at the Teach Meet. I don't know if any of you were there last Wednesday or Thursday. There were over 100 teachers there, and there was a head teacher, I think, from Doncaster, who was talking about your role as teachers and the concept of in loco parentis. And we come across so many children for whom teachers perform that role of parent in an incredible fashion. And we come across so many children who would otherwise never, ever have the chance to go into a wild place, whether it's because of their socioeconomic background or their cultural background. They just wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity. So whether it is getting into a wild place or getting out and seeing something exciting in the city, I'd really urge you to do that, because they might not otherwise get a choice. And I'm sure you know that anyway. So we know you know that, because Natural England asked 2,500 teachers what they thought about the impact of outdoor learning. So we know that you agree, and we know that we're probably teaching you to suck eggs with all of that. But it was interesting to see the response. 57% of those teachers felt that outdoor learning had a positive impact on attainment, 92% on health and well-being, 92% on children's engagement with learning, and 93% on improved social skills. So it's not just an airy-fairy, it would be nice to do. It really does have a genuine impact. But we also know it's really hard. And teachers on the ground tell us all the time about why they can or can't do certain things. We know that you don't have any time. We know that you have to be target focused, and sometimes outdoor learning doesn't seem like the most direct route to achieving that. We know that you don't have any money, and neither do we, and that's something that we're all struggling with. We know that often classroom teachers feel that they have a lack of permission to take their children outside. I was talking to one teacher who has to give 12 weeks' notice to go for a walk outside the school grounds. So permission is, and as leaders, permission. I know, but that is happening, and it might not be happening in your schools, but it is happening around. So if you come across barriers like that, we'd really willingly help you work through them. And lack of skills and lack of confidence. We're often teaching teachers how to rig up tarps, but actually that's a fundamental skill if you're wanting to take kids outside all year round. How to rig up a tarp is a really important thing to know how to do. Doesn't seem like it's a vital teacher training skill, but it is. And you're all telling us it's simply not a priority. But I'd like to turn that around and say, out of those things, those impacts that I've just mentioned, which one of those is not a priority for you? And then if you take that one step further and you look at something like the Education Endowment Foundation's toolkit for achieving progress with pupils, and you compare outdoor learning to something like the employment of a teaching assistant, we are less expensive. There is more proof that we have an impact. So it definitely is something that's worth exploring. It feels like it's going to be a costly option, and it feels like it's going to be something that's just going to take time for not much benefit. But the proof is out there. And in fact, Natural England, who carried out that study that I just mentioned, they reviewed all of the evidence for outdoor learning over the past 10 years, both in the UK and abroad. And so it was a very, very thorough study. And they came up with this. So I'm sorry to read out from the presentation, but school students engaged in learning in natural environments, which is outdoor learning, have been found to have higher achievement, both in comparison to their peers and their projected attainment in reading, maths and science. So again, it's not just about behaviour, it's not just about mental health, it's not just about those things that sometimes feel ancillary to what you do. It really is about the core targets as well. So we want to help you. We're always looking for opportunities to provide you with funded outdoor learning, and I've just sent some leaflets around the room. We've just signed a really exciting partnership with E.ON Blackburn Meadows renewable energy site, and we're going to be delivering a very limited number of free sessions, both for primary schools and for secondary schools. So if you're interested in outdoor learning, you want a taste of it, but you're struggling for budget, if you can fill in that form or come and see me, or email the email address that's on there, then we can talk about how we can work together on that. We've also been in conversation. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. We've also been in conversation with Stephen about the potential for an outdoor learning network. so that teachers can share best practice with other teachers and try and overcome some of these barriers together. So the teacher who faces a 12-week delay in going out for a walk can talk to another teacher who has managed to persuade their head that they don't need those kind of timescales or permissions in order to do that. So again, if anybody knows of any teachers in their school who would benefit from being part of that, we'd consider setting that up and running with it. But we need people to be interested first. So we need the evidence that that's going to be worth our time to do. So speak up, please. And again, along the same front, if you already do great outdoor learning in your school or you know somebody who does, please come and tell us, because we want to showcase what you do, because there are brilliant things happening in Sheffield, and sometimes we just need a little bit of inspiration to see how it can be done. And I think that's best come peer-to-peer rather than us as outdoor learning experts saying it's easy, because, you know, it is for us. And finally, just to leave you with one final thought, which is that Sheffield is amazing. It is rammed full of learning opportunities out there beyond your school walls. Whatever you do, whether it's outdoor learning in school or going outside your school, go and explore. You know, places from the Woodland Discovery Centre in Ecclesall Woods right through to Eon's renewable energy plant. There's so much out there that can help you, so come and ask us about it.